Um, okay, I guess we can start with the first question, about the how did the Shakers make it work economically? Um, I thought from like the perspective of economics, how they on it was on page 43 where it kind of got more into the economic standpoint, I thought, um, where it spoke to the act of selling their property in order to like save and gain capital and that kind of um like approach to living that they chose to do. And going off of that, like they spoke about how it was like a network of villages kind of that they lived in. And I thought that kind of spoke to how between their, I think they call it like the unified society or something, um, they kind of created like their sense of economic well-being by like how they operated and like evolutionized over the year. They became instead of sort of like communism where they pooled their wealth, raised children cooperatively, and placed possessions into a common stock. So that's from my interpretation of it, kind of how they worked out their life like in an economic standpoint, despite their refusal to procreate.
Yeah, I feel like also on the fact that they kept getting kicked out of all of the towns that they were trying to live in,
Yeah,
having to move throughout New England. They just like kept getting new converts to the religion. And then
yeah,
I also had a quote that talked about when they returned to Nis Niskayuna and
yeah,
their turbulent 2-year odyssey through New England had yielded at least 2,000 converts. And when they did get those converts to the religion, like they used the land that they already had just to live off of it and build more of the buildings for them.
yeah,
Yeah, I also think they like worked economically because it said that since they had so many new converts, they were able to like buy their goods in bulk, so it was cheaper. And also they
mm,
had enough people to have like industrial kitchens. They had their own bakeries, barns, workshops, farms, like because they had so many of those new converts and all that new land that those converts were bringing in, they were able to do well for themselves.
yeah. And like going off of the land part, I had read um it like kind of spoke to like collectivism, but it was about the land and like sharing their land, food and money, um, which I kind of thought that spoke to like an interesting way that they approached like their economic standing um, in that time. Yeah. From the governmental, like the governance perspective, I kind of thought that like when it at least I thought that the most like governance like focus part was when Mother Anne had become like the figure that people were focusing on, and they had looked up to her for they had like said the otherworldly charisma, and I think like people gravitated towards her as like how she governed, and it like continued towards like the movements of their society after I think his name was William passed on, but then also then I thought that like it talked about when James Whitaker then took over afterwards, and it evolved, like the governance kind of evolved because he could read and write, and then from his advantage, like I guess in comparison to the other Shakers, um it said that he tightened and formalized restrictions on acceptable Shaker conduct and initialized or initiated decisive break from the world. So I kind of thought that was like a step in the direction of like how governance evolved a little bit. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I also,
Oh no, you go, you go.
sorry, I also had like a quote from page 38 where it said Anne Lee had an intuitive knowledge of people's needs and she tailored her pitch to the sinner. So I feel like that kind of connects with like the economic standpoint and the government standpoint
Yeah.
because she had this charisma like you were talking about that like made people want to follow her and like helped her gain all of these followers. And through those followers, like they got um the economic, like they got the land, they got the money, and yeah, so it kind of her charisma helped both standpoints.
Yeah.
For the governance aspect of that, I thought it was interesting that after Mother Anne and um crap, what's his name? Sorry, one second.
There are so many people that like
So many.
passed away. Yeah.
Um, after Mother Anne and the one after her died, and then it was Joseph that was given the title of first elder, and he had given Lucy Wright the title of co-founder elder.
Mm.
And after, and both of them had met Mother Anne, and Mother Anne had like advocated for both of them. But after all of them had passed, it became just like the four groups of elders that took over and then created like a bunch of laws.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also had that
Oh,
written
go ahead.
down. Oh, sorry.
No,
I thought
no.
it was interesting because it said Lucy Wright said that she refused publication of like the strict regulations on
Mm.
page 74, but then immediately after she died, like a few months later, the four elders published all of those laws, which made life really strict and so different from all of the leaders before.
Yeah, I think that kind of relates to the paradox in the song lyric when crap, I don't remember what the song lyric was, but it was like talking about how live free, and
Yeah.
after that they completely did not live free. Like their entire government aspect was like it was just like controlled day-to-day aspects.
Yeah. I agree. Um, what was the next question? Oh, it goes back to like the video of Sam Weinberg's. Um, and how hard was it for you to empathize with these folks? And what should you resist doing when reading the Shakers or any other past group? Oh, I think how I interpret what he was saying was just kind of he had like made the claim that it's difficult to kind of see different people's like perspectives and think that you're like in not like a bit like self-interest but just or I guess like a little egotistical where you just think that you're better than people before you or around you and that he had said I think it was like he called like the term historical hubris but I guess that was he said that's what we would tend to do but we shouldn't do that and we should resist doing that when we listen or read about like the Shakers or past groups. Um, but I kind of thought that it was a little difficult to like empathize the economic part of it because I thought it was just so different than what our world is like today. And just like a lot of different aspects of it is just like so different. And I think because our world now has been so progressively like improving and changing that it's so different than how they behaved and lived that I'm just like I can't like exactly get behind like how they acted if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And I thought it was like you can't really ever put yourself in their shoes because we can never live in like that time period.
Yeah.
Yeah, like no matter how much we want to imagine like what it would be like, we could never.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I watched the video first. I don't know if anyone else did that. So
So did
like
I.
I feel like it was a little easier to like empathize kind of because I had that thought in like the back of my head like, oh, I should try to like understand where they're coming from, like the time period. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's so difficult because it's so different from the society that we live in. Like I couldn't even really imagine that happening today just because it's just so different from how we all live. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And then I think the next one is reading the I'm trying to pull up the things. I can read it. I just have to grab it.
I also have it open if you want me to read it.
Oh yeah, you can.
It's the last two paragraphs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says the Shakers' aversion to the world as they found it and their exuberant millenarian hopes combined to liberate them from any regard to the established forms of human association. Within their villages, they built an entirely new kind of society, one founded upon total equality, spiritual transcendence, and a utopian faith in the perfectibility of life on earth. We are the people who turned the world upside down, Anne Lee liked to say. Ultimately, life within Zion was less about what the Shakers did than what about, oh my gosh, than about what they didn't do, namely, just about everything that might be called worldly. To them, the state of total abstention, what they called being simple, added up to a doctrine of radical freedom, freedom from appetite, from nature, from impulse, and perhaps most important from the conventions of the world. By scorching out the lusty, scuffling habits of Babylon, the Shakers hope to perfect and liberate their souls and their community. Their best known song celebrates this remarkable paradox. I will bow and be simple. I will bow and be free.
Um, yeah, so the first one was, what did the Shakers mean by living simply? And I kind of thought going back into the reading, on page 57 was something that stood out to me as like how that relates to living simply. And it had said that um, they had thought of life in the villages conveyed as a Sabbath calm. Um, and then it said that like the connection to God throughout everything you do in your life. Um, and the last part was that villages were an earthly reflection of how things look in heaven. So just that like there was a lot of connection between like spirituality in heaven as well as like the Sabbath calm and just kind of like an ease or like a peace of mind living in the villages. And that's kind of how I interpreted like they're living simply. They connected it to heaven or just like a calm environment or place.
For that, I also like for this living simply, I thought of it as like when they talked about how they did work throughout the day, but it was more leisureful. Like they consistently did work, but they could like they like sang and danced when they did the work.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it as like doing something for God and just like it wasn't like a chore to them, and it was much more leisureful. And then also like looking back on like on Anne Lee's days in Manchester when it was like starvation and all of that, like living simply was like being free from the starvation and the impulse and like yeah, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think back to like the living simply how I forget which leader, but he was like he wanted all of like the design and the architecture to be very simple because all of their work they wanted to just kind of be simple and like their daily living should be like reflective of God.
Yeah. And then this talks about the paradox. I guess what is the paradox in the song. Um, and I thought it was, I guess so I think it was bow and be simple, bow and be free, right? Um, I just kind of felt like bow in general kind of seems like you're like succumbing to something or like have like a there's a idea of like humility in that. Um, and so I guess that could kind of like relate to the simple life where you don't have much um I guess like freedom, which then is kind of like attributes to the paradox where then it says like bow and be free. So I just don't think those two things can like happen at the same time. Um, because it seems so contradictory and like that it just can't happen in the same life if you're doing both those at the same time.
I agree with that. And then I also like looking back on Weinberg's, it's just like looking back in their time and like they like thought that that like was normal to like bow
Yeah.
and be free.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys were saying. I thought it was very contradictory that it's saying they're bowing because to me that means they're like succumbing to like a leader, or they're like giving up some kind of freedom, but then they're saying by doing that they're also being free. It's just the contradictory. Um, yeah.
And the final one was, how can you empathize with the philosophy expressed in the song lyric? Oh, drawing on like Weinberg's philosophy, or like what his message was in his little video. Um, I guess I kind of thought like putting myself in their shoes, I can see how like the unified life could kind of, or like bowing down could kind of be seen as like a form of freedom just because that's all that they've known. So they don't know what like freedom I guess kind of is, because they found like they just kind of made it into like what they wanted it to be and found that as like a happy form of living. Um, but again, like what I was talking about before, that it's so different from how they lived versus how we're living now. And like bowing down to someone just seems so opposite of freedom to me. And like that's not how like our world functions really. That was my thought of it.
Yeah, and also like trying to, from Weinberg, just trying to like kind of see through their eyes, thinking of it like being a religious community. I could see how like them bowing down to like their God would be freeing to them, because this is like, that was the point of the community. Like they're all coming together to create this like God's kingdom. So like, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like with more context, maybe it would look better if it was like actually talking to the god, but it is also very different for that time and what they thought was fine and what they would let happen.
Yeah. I think that's it. So if anyone else has like anything they want to add, I think we covered everything pretty
I
much.
think the only thing, sorry, I'm looking back. It says that we were supposed to,
Yeah.
in the beginning,
Say how much
just
we
go
read.
around saying how much we read. So I don't know if we
Oh,
want to say that now.
oh yeah, sure. I read the whole thing.
I just read the whole thing.
Same.
Sad.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, nice. Okay.
All right. Do we have the 15 minutes?